few poets of whom I'm aware have had such a diverse output as Rodger Kamenetz. He's done 7 books of poetry, for which he is extremely well known. He's done 5 nonfiction books. One of them, I grind my teeth in envy, is a bestseller, The Jew and the Lotus, and he's been the subject of a PBS documentary and received the supreme ointment from one of his other books from Oprah. So we are here today to celebrate Rodger and his new book, The Missing Jew, poems from 1976 to 2022. Perhaps we can start by my asking, since this book originally appeared some years ago, it is I guess a collected poems to which you keep adding as time passes.
Right.
What caused you to do that as opposed to bringing out new books of poetry instead of gathering these all together?
That would have been intelligent. Why didn't I think of that? That's a good idea. I just felt that it was a project that was important to me to keep together. And the book has appeared in several incarnations, or as we say, Gilgulim, turns of the wheel. So the last version was in 1992, I think, about 30 years ago. And it felt good to have all the family together in one book. The other piece is, this is a book festival, and I belong to the world's oldest book club. As a Jew, we've been reading the same book all over the world for 3,000 years. So I don't know. That's a pretty extraordinary track record of engagement with the book. Muhammad correctly called Jewish people the people of the book, and that "of" is a very interesting preposition. There's some way in which we are of the book, in the sense that in many ways our culture and heritage, our portable homeland, which is the Torah, has been something we've carried with us wherever we've gone, even to New Orleans, where I've been since 1995, and Louisiana since 1981. The Missing Jew is a book of books, not in the Holy of Holies sense, but a book composed of books, and each book, they all talk to each other, and the poems themselves, I think, illustrate the essential gesture, the way we've kept our book alive, which is called midrash, which means derivation, more or less. The origin of the word is, anyway, so we take a text, and then there's something wrong with the text, and instead of saying, oh, that's a bad text, we respond to it in a way that makes it more beautiful, even the imperfection. So this response is called midrash traditionally. And as we're going to see, there's a lot of poems that are based on that technique.
Why don't you give us an example? Rodger and I made a sort of selection process in advance. The Invisible.
Yeah.
Do you want to read from the book, or your?
But let me ruin my iPhone.
Well, it's true. Your iPhone is. Everybody uses the iPhone now.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the very first poem, which was written somewhere around 1976, it opens the whole book, and in a way, when you hear the first line, the whole book is actually a midrash on the first line, which I'm still trying to understand. The invisible is stronger than the visible. The desert subtracted so many objects, there was nothing left but the wind. Like all good ideas, God was stolen. The Jews, being superior thieves, removed all the markings. The history of my family is the history of breezes and the exodus, the getaway. My grandfathers, one carrying a barber pole, the other a tailor's needle.
I love that line, like all good ideas, God was stolen. One could apply that across the map of religions, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. How did that notion come to you?
Well, I don't remember my 26-year-old mind very well, or what's left of it, but I think there was some theory that when the Hebrew people, the Israelites, were in Egypt, that there was a monotheistic move by one of the pharaohs. I don't know how long it lasted. And so maybe the idea is we got the idea from them and then took it and rolled with it. I got a lot of flack from some members of the Jewish community about Jews being superior thieves, but I say it with pride.
I had a little flack from another religious community in my day.
Oh, yeah, I know. And I share your woe, brother. We'll talk about that sometime. All right.
Not here.
No.
We're in mixed company. So the markings
Right.
is another poem that
Right.
continues in this mode. Why don't you?
Yeah, so originally Midrash would mean a commentary on a sacred text. And I had this idea that I could make my own text sacred by writing Midrash on my own words. And so but also in a certain way, years later I was reading a letter from Keats, which I recommend you do immediately. All of his letters are so great. And somewhere he says this really enigmatic thing that I always ponder. He says, what is creative creates itself. What is creative creates itself. And what I understand that to mean is something similar to the Midrashic process, that you write a poem and then something sort of sticks out and asks for, instead of a criticism or an I don't like it, another poem. And that way the poems create themselves. So the Markings was written for the edition of The Missing Jew that came out many years later in 1991. The original was a kind of skinny book in 1979. So let's see what I did with it. I don't know. The Markings. Lips on faces, tassels of the oak and flower, silk of corn, the gelatin of the seed and its taste bursting against the roof of the mouth. Lips on faces speaking the original words, all stripped away, so disbelief shall not mar the tongue, nor idolatry blind the eye, but all shall be seen as seen once. That once, recurring in flashes throughout time, when the proper light illuminates the scene, as seeing the bud of the ligustrum burst, knowing its name is right. That is called smelling the breath of the newborn, a sweet secret. That once, before Adam spoke the names that rose from the war within each thing, dividing the light from the darkness and giving to darkness the name. Wow. So I guess you could tell that by the time I wrote that poem, I was living in Baton Rouge. Because of the ligustrum thing. I'm a Baltimorean, but we didn't have it there. But, ligustrum were quite prominent for those of us who moved. And so the poem, the impulse of writing this book traveled with my life wherever I went. I wrote a book called The Missing Jew, 1979, and got hired by LSU to live in Baton Rouge. So the title was like,
missing, yes.
Yeah, exactly. It was like, wow, it worked.
I didn't know it was so autobiographical a book.
Oh, everything. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, everything.
Yeah.
Throughout your poems, there is this sense of searching, a kind of quest that comes upon these little epiphanies where it's almost fulfilled and then the shadow passes and here you are starting again. looking back over the many years that are collected in this book, what would you say is the singular lesson that you have come away with about your own work?
Well, we were in Hawaii, Big Island, when I was working with the editor putting the book together, and I wondered, because I was adding another 30 years of work, gee, does this hold together? And as I worked with the editor, his name is Julia Knobloch, who was great, I was really surprised to discover either I am the most boring and repetitious person in the world, which may be true, or just a singular attack on very similar concerns. I mean, one of them is language, names. That runs throughout the book. The question of what does it mean to name things, and in this particular poem, what does it mean just before we name something? That's smelling the breath of the newborn. When we name it, it darkens it, we lose the light. And then the other is books. So there are a lot of poems about books. And again, there are a lot of poems that respond and speak back to other poems. I'm a person who hears voices and sees things. And I didn't necessarily want to spend 46 years writing about rabbis, but they talk inside my head. And some of that started from the beginning, but it never really stopped, and I haven't found a cure for it. Maybe you have one, I don't know.
Wish the rabbis would talk to me. I could use some help.
Well, no, they don't talk to me, they talk in me.
Oh.
There's a difference.
I'll just revise that a tad. Here's something I'm curious about, and it's not so far referenced in these poems, but
Right.
When you were 16 years old, I think Rodger holds the absolute distinction of being the only person to march in a civil rights demonstration, which went from Baltimore to Washington, reading as he marched the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. He was 16. And yet later you had you turned a corner and began to look at T.S. Eliot quite differently.
Right. So I was 15, and now the reason I mention is it was 1965, and two things happened in 1965, one of which we just commemorated, which was Selma. And I was tutoring in a place called Fellowship House. I believe I was a sophomore in high school, tutoring African-American kids on Saturdays. And I saw a little poster for this organization called, I read it as SNCC, it was SNCC. And they were doing a protest of the murder of Reverend James Reeb. And so me and my good friend Mark Lieberman, joined the protest and marched. I did not read the poem. I had already memorized it. The other thing that happened in 1965 was T.S. Eliot won the Nobel Prize in Literature. And my girlfriend at the time had given me a hardcover copy of the book. I loved Eliot. I memorized Eliot. Maybe I identified a little with Prufrock, as a rather shy person, insecure. I still am. But I didn't think then that there could possibly be any difference between poetry and the civil rights movement. In my mind, such as it was, that all the beautiful things were marching together. I had no idea. So my first disillusionment was to find out after starting to read Eliot that, it was one thing that he was a Jew hater. I don't use the term anti-Semite because it was invented by anti-Semites. So I prefer the more clear term Jew hater. He was a Jew hater. He always was a Jew hater. I'm pretty sure if the war had gone the other way, he would have been dancing in the streets, quite likely.
Like Ezra Pound.
Like Ezra Pound. You have to think about that. But when I started reading that the hatred was inscribed inside the poems, if we start eliminating poets because of opinions they have, that's that's a little different. But if they inscribe the hatred into their work, you can't miss it. It's something different, At least it hit me. So suddenly one of my poetic fathers, the other one was Arthur Rimbaud, so they were sort of an odd couple. I was very disillusioned, and it was painful. It only took me till I wrote the lowercase Jew to finally work it out. I was 53 when I finally came to terms with my pain at age 15.
And that book, the title poem in that book is a trial of T.S. Eliot,
Right.
With Rodger sort of as the hand behind that of the prosecutor. It's really a remarkable poem. So I raise that question about Eliot because, as Cardinal Newman famously said, to live is to change, and to change often is to have lived well. You seem to have changed a great deal in the course of these poems,
Right.
but also in that road toward a kind of spiritual engagement.
Yeah, that's interesting because when I wrote the poem, The Lowercase Jew, the question of... I used all Eliot's characters. He had two Jewish characters. One was the prosecutor, one was the defense attorney. Sir Ferdinand Klein, the most anti-Semitic line break in history, right? Sir Ferdinand Klein. And the other guy was Bleistein. I really had to dig in and say, well, what sentence should I give him? And I decided to sentence him to Jewish purgatory, which was to attend Chaim Plutzik's grandson's bar mitzvah. Now, if you don't know who Chaim Plutzik is, you have a treat in store. He's a great poet of the 50s with that name at the University of Rochester. So how do you judge the people, or how do you live with the pain of people who cause you pain without keeping in mind that even those people have something good in them? And, that's where I got some help from His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who says, my religion is kindness. I get a lot of help from my own tradition, which says, we are called upon to love your neighbor as yourself, which means it's easy when you like your neighbor, but it's a lot harder when you don't. That's our struggle. To me, that seems like the biggest struggle there is. How do you love someone that you don't like? Very hard. And then the third piece is Dante, which I guess we'll get to. But, yeah.
You're stealing my questions.
Oh, of course.
No, that's all right. I'm here to serve.
I read your mind. I know.
Well, you mentioned the Dalai Lama, and you have that wonderful poem, Pill Pool. Perhaps you could illuminate with that.
Okay, so the connection to the Dalai Lama is that although I wrote this poem long before that, when we met with His Holiness in 1990, which is described in The Jewel and the Lotus, one of the very learned professors with us, Nathan Katz, who spoke Tibetan and Hebrew, which not so many people do, explained that there wasn't any history of any conversation ever between Tibetans and the Jewish people. However, there were some Sanskrit loan words in Hebrew, and one of them is the word for pepper, which in Hebrew is pilpul. However, its particular meaning in this poem is what I would call Jewish Talmudic Olympics, where in Talmud people argue back and forth about the meaning of a text. And sometimes, just to annoy the teacher, you will pose a really impossible question and just to see, how the teacher will respond. And that's called a pilpul. So this poem, and again, this poem is derived from a reading that the first line comes from the text. There's a word in it to fill in, which means the magical boxes Jews wear between their eyes and on their hands when they pray, as we were told to do in Deuteronomy. And inside those mysterious boxes are the instructions to wear these boxes, which is, to me, is very Jewish. Like in the mezuzah, have you seen the mezuzah, the little thing on the doorpost of the house, right? inside is the instruction to put the mezuzah up there. So I love that, because this is like very, we're very into language. Okay, so here's the poem. Rabbi, if a child is born with two heads, which head should wear the yarmulke? On which head the tefillin? Some say the right head, and some say the left. All quote Torah. Some say both heads, just in case. But if a man is born with two heads, he is always confused. He never knows on which head to wear the yarmulke. Two heads and only two eyes. He walks towards himself in the old cemetery where the rabbis are buried. There seems to be some disagreement. Some are saying, we are dead. Others, we are alive. Some say both. All quote Torah.
How did the engagement with the Dalai Lama, when you were with that group of rabbis in Dharamsala, India, where the Tibetan community is in exile, has been for many years, right. What was the impact on your idea of spirituality?
I wasn't a spiritual person. I practiced Judaism because I was born on that team, so that's what we did. I mean, I didn't see any point in doing something else. But when I was there and I was embedded with, I was just the observer, I was embedded with these learned rabbis in this incredible environment of Tibetan exile and so many monks and lamas and holy people. And I saw in each case how their commitment to spirituality made them work together and be better people. And in the case of His Holiness, to endure this exile, which he and his people are still enduring. I saw the power of that. And there's a moment I describe in the book, which, since we're talking about poetry, was a moment where a metaphor became a metonymy. So I'm going to explain that word. But basically, my great teacher, Reb Zalman, and His Holiness were talking, and Reb Zalman said quite beautifully, after being prodded by the Dalai Lama, he said, there's an angel of the Jews and the angel of Tibet. There's an angel for each nation, which is true in our Jewish lore. And His Holiness was curious about that. And Zalman said, well, if we do the dialogue right, the angel of the Jews is talking through me, and the angel of Tibet is listening through you, and vice versa. So the dialogue isn't just on one level. So you could think of that as many people might as a metaphor. I felt it was real, and that was the moment. So it became a metonymy, an instance rather than two levels of reality, a metaphorical level that isn't quite real, and it's just used for ornament, and another level. No, it was one thing. And they really were the two angels. I mean, they embodied that, and it was true. So I think there's in the movie, Moira says she still doesn't understand what I'm talking about. I hope she understands now. But it was, I guess it was a moment, it was one of those moments that changed me, yeah.
There's another moment in that book, The Jew and the Lotus, where the Dalai Lama, if I recall correctly, says words to the effect, he was so curious about the Jews, saying, there's so much you can teach us about the struggle, about endurance.
Right. He said, tell me the spiritual secret. Tell me the secret of spiritual survival in exile. As one of the people said in the group, for 2,000 years we survived in exile. Up to now, no one ever asked, ever thought to ask, how did you do it? So it was a very gracious and wonderful question. And we gave our advice. But, more importantly, as my teacher, Reb Zalman, said, we didn't come just to sell, but also to buy. And His Holiness gave us some advice. And part of the advice was, if you have these deeper, mystical, esoteric traditions, sometimes if you don't teach them, they'll disappear. So right after the book came out, there was this huge opening, and a lot of Jews started studying Kabbalah. Now, of course, you can study it in the supermarket, whatever. But and meditation, Jewish meditation. So all these things started, I think, because of His Holiness's advice to us.
Would you say that you found yourself on a sort of mystic trail at that point, or path?
Well, like in the poem, I had two heads. I had a Jewish head and a Buddhist head. So, and then I also had a poet head, so it's popping out in the middle. And somehow the poetry became a way to go deeper and understand. I didn't have to shuttle back and forth between either tradition. I personally think the dream and the poem are the fundament of all religion. They're underneath it all.
Rodger has also been a dream analyst for a number of years. And one of the things you told me once in conversation, and for the record, I'm not one of his clients.
Boy, do you need it. I'm just kidding.
In the manner of the ancient Greeks, I shall now pass over what he just said. But that, that's a great line.
Timing.
Timing is everything. No, but you said that the sacred comes to us in forms during the dream life.
Right.
Was that an idea or perhaps an epiphany that came to you after the encounter with the Dalai Lama?
Partly because the Tibetans are the most visual people you can imagine with all this iconography, and they have a practice of visualization where they take in these forms and images into themselves, and you know, they look at deities and all sorts of things that they take in themselves. And I asked a guy once, well, isn't that just a projection? And he said, yeah, but it's more real than any person I know. So, which is an interesting way to think about our Western religions too. But that led me to a curiosity. Was there something like this in Judaism, which led me to some dream teachers, which led me to become a dream practitioner, which led me to insulting Oprah on television? We got in a big fight, and she didn't like what I said about her dreams. So I think as what's his name? Skip Gates said, if Oprah says she's a Zulu, she's a Zulu. You know, like I didn't hear about that till later, so now I know.
Well, you know, one of the things that has long intrigued me about your work is the way in which you approach Eliot to then go deeper into Dante, who was Eliot's profound influence.
Right.
And the Commedia, the Divine Comedy, of course, is, you know, the great Christian allegory, hell, purgatory, paradise.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Why don't you read Practice Heaven and then tell us how it ties to what you've
Right.
done with Dante?
Okay. So Jason and I had I started reading Dante during the pandemic and carried it with me to Paris and carried it back here when we had to leave because of the pandemic. You don't happen to know the page on that, do you?
Oh, yeah, I think it's 192.
Thank you.
Or wait, 193.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, oddly enough, I wrote this poem in 2016, so it doesn't matter. Practice Heaven, written on a plane to China, June 19th, 2016. This means practice the feelings you would have in heaven. Practice them now while you're still alive. Practice living in harmony and grace. Drink the milk of paradise and eat the honeydew. Be kind. Look into the depths of things. Respect the world inside each person. Respect the angelic in the person. Listen for the angelic and amplify it. Return indifference with curiosity. Be gentle in word and gesture, gentle in speech, gentle hands and gentle tongue. Live each moment. Live the past as the shadow behind you, but walk in the sun. Walk to the light. Love the light in each one. Love the one in each one. See unity in simplicity. See the curve of the eyebrow in the rainbow. Hear the human voice in the sparrow. Feel the sparrow bones in the child's hand. Be gentle with the imagination of children. Love as the child loves. Cry as the child cries. Follow your way. Consult the sensations in your body. Practice heaven. Wake from your dreams into dream. Know you have choice. See compulsion for what it is, cruelty and violence. Never say what you always say, but only what the moment requires. Breathe the air as the air of heaven and be grateful. Let thank you be your prayer and speak to God through persons. So that's a very odd poem for me to write. Very different, you know.
Well, I was going to say that the whole tenor and tone in which you read it differs sharply from the previous ones.
Oh, yeah. So something happened. So one thing I want to say, because you'd mentioned Dante, and of course conventionally Dante is the poet of Inferno, the hell, Purgatorio, Purgatory, and Paradiso, heaven. For me, the great teacher of imagery, the power of images, which I was already attuning to through dreams. Every night, if we're lucky, we're given a gift of an image, and that image comes from, in my view, this capacity in us called primary imagination that we all have. If you ever doubt that you have imagination, go remember your dreams. You have imagination. And by honoring that quality, that capacity to create new images, you are honoring your soul, and you're developing soul, and the soul speaks in images, as Dante shows us. In a letter to his patron, Con Grande, which I think literally means big dog, the guy who funded the poem, he describes the poem as the states of soul. And my reading of Dante is, I don't think he thought there was some hole you go down to and there's a hell underneath the earth. I don't think he believed that. I don't think he believed there was a mountain somewhere that you can climb up to purgatory. I don't think he was a literalist, unfortunately, the way we are. I think he thought he was presenting the states of the soul so that we're all sometimes in hell, sometimes in heaven, and sometimes in purgatory. When we are so caught up in our obsessions, in our tortured idea of what we think is a good, such as money or power or sex or domination, then we're in hell. When we're so obsessed in dividing people, then we're going to be sentenced to the hell where we walk in a circle and we get sliced in half by a sword, and just as we heal, we get sliced in half again. When we're thieves, when we steal, we will be like serpents exchanging parts of their bodies with other people. We don't respect boundaries. Dante showed us in vivid imagery the states of hell that the soul lives. He showed us in purgatory how we might climb out of that at times through certain practices. And he showed us in Paradiso where we're trying to get to. And I think that touches into the poem, that's saying, as a Jew, we never talk much about heaven or the afterlife. Some Jews have that belief, I suppose, world to come, but not a biggie for me. I think it's all here. But I think we can practice heaven here. And the chief way, and I also got this in part from Dante, was by looking for what's good in other people. Because, as Dante teaches through Aristotle, when you see what's good, you can't help but love it. So love is not just what I feel. Love is a practice. It is an actual endeavor to understand and look for whatever you see that's good in another person and then amplify it. And when you do that, you will come to love that person. And that person will probably come to love you. So that to me is a practice that I think I learned in part from Dante and in part from Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav. So again, two heads.
You know, it was really striking to me when the pandemic began.
Yeah.
We were exchanging emails and having long conversations about Dante. I
Yeah.
had recently finished my second reading of the Commedia, which took several years.
Sure.
And I didn't read it in the Italian, as you did. But you began going through each canto on Facebook.
Yeah. I never got out of hell because it was Facebook.
Oh, that's good, Roger. We need to, that should be a pull quote for next year's booksellers conference. But I do wonder if that exercise, when the news, day and night, everyone remembers what 2.5, 3 years ago.
Yeah.
It seemed like we were in this waking nightmare.
Right.
I will. The one thing I remember about Andrew Cuomo was that deep voice, "Give me more ventilators," you know.
Right.
And soon he was, consigned to his own,
Purgatory.
let's say, yeah, right. Or I think he's still, sort of trapped.
Catholic purgatory for him. Yes.
Well, yeah, he's Sicilian, yes.
Yeah. It's okay.
No, but what I'm wondering is, in times, of disaster and darkness, such as we're living in right now, Dante is almost there as one of those angels you described.
Yes.
I mean, I think people are drawn to him
Right.
because of the combination of unflinching confrontation with the worst of us,
Right.
and at the same time singing,
Right.
to quote Lincoln, the better angels of our nature.
Right.
Yeah.
That's beautifully said. I think Dante gives us both his great poetry and the pilgrimage of the character Dante that he is in the poem, which are not quite the same thing. And when he finally meets Beatrice and Saint Bernard, and he's sort of taken to the highest vision, which is the celestial rose, and he actually has some kind of glimpse of a light that he can't quite describe. Yeah, I find it very moving. And for me, the most important part for me that really touched me was the examination on love. He has a 3-part exam to get to the highest place, and the last is with John. I don't know if it's John the Revelator or John the I think it's John the Revelator. Yeah, I love that song about John the Revelator. But he says that he quotes Aristotle about the good, but then he also quotes the book of Exodus, where the one says to Moses, I will show you all my goodness. I think the phrase is, I will cause my goodness to pass before you, which is a very beautiful idea. It's a visionary idea. So, of course, Dante always quotes both the Greeks and the Hebrews. These are his two go-to. He wants to converge and bring together. He's an incredibly unifying force for me. And I'm a person of the book, but he's also one of my books. And why shouldn't I learn from him? I learned a lot from him.
We have about 3 minutes left and can take a couple of questions. If you have them, the microphone is in the middle. I see someone lining up. take my arm down so it's not.
Right.
Hi.
Hi.
What book of yours was the poem that you read?
All the poems I read were from this very book, The Missing Jew, poems 1976 to 2022, so about 46 years worth, yeah.
Okay.
And it
The
is for
Missing Jew.
sale here. Not
Thank
to be vulgar, but, you know,
No, and the inscriptions are free.
yeah, that's true.
Hello, I wanted to thank you both for this lovely conversation. You mentioned that these works are collected over 46 years worth of time, and I'm just wondering, each iteration, do you leave your previously published works untouched, or do you go back and tinker with them and jam a new line or edit them, or do you just sort of add the new ones in? I'm a poet myself, and I'm forever tinkering, so I would just love to know what you've done with this work. Thank you.
Oh, you rascal. Love that question. You know. I tinkered a little bit, but I won't say where. But poems that a young man in 1976 wrote did need a little tinkering. So the earlier poems got a little bit tinkered. And then in terms of how we put the book together, there's some chronology in the front part, and then a little less chronology as we move forward. It's grouped by categories. There's a collection on Jewish holidays, a collection on mourning, a collection on Psalms, on trying to find God. So they're all different sections or books in the book. It was fun to put together.
Thank you.
Thank you for your beautiful question and knowing question.
We have 40 seconds left.
Okay.
Rodger, it's all yours.
Okay. I'm going to read one more poem. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. So it's the last poem in the book. It's called An Empty Closet, and it's dedicated to you. If there's a secret to being known, is there a secret to being unknowable? Either way, I would like to step into a closet and change not just my clothes, my face, my hair, my eyes. I would like to change my hands to touch you. I would like to change my jokes into prayers. I would sneak up on you like the shadow under your foot. Unknown, I would be your path. In a secret closet, I would hang my arms, my heart. I would hang my lungs like a vest and watch them tremble with breath. I would lay my eyes like cufflinks in a tray. But then how would I see you? The same way I hold the knob of an invisible door and walk out toward emptiness and you, through emptiness to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.